We're going to be bringing in Rodney Ascher. He directed Room 237, that interesting documentary about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. It's going to lead us into the back end of the show. Let's bring Rodney in and have a little talk with him. All right, guys? Hi, Rodney. How you doing?
I'm good. How's it going, guys?
I am very well. I'm Tom. I'm the host of the Cutting Room Movie Podcast. You're also joined by Billy, Dave, and Max. Say hi, guys.
Rodney, it's a
Hello
real
there.
pleasure, man. It's your film, man.
Right on. Well, thanks a lot.
Well, Rodney,
It's a crazy-ass movie.
Rodney, you know, tonight we're having this very long special show on, I mean, really the whole life of Stanley Kubrick, his pictures, his thoughts, his images. I mean, just everything. I mean, we've been really going at it.
That's going to be a long show.
Yeah, it is, you know, but we're getting there, man. We're near The Shining. We just finished talking about Barry Lyndon, but I do want to go, you know, not just to throw you into the fire and just start talking about The Shining in your movie, but obviously, you know, you have a deep love for Stanley Kubrick. I'm right to assume this, right?
Yeah, of course.
What was it about Stanley that got to you first when you were a young man? What was the film? What was the experience? What was it that brought you to Stanley Kubrick?
Well, I'm sure it must have been 2001. I mean, you know, I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s, and you know, they were still doing, you know, theatrical re-releases of that film, you know, every couple of years. You know, so I got to see it for the first time in a theater where, you know, it's such an immersive experience. You know, just the look and the feel of it, you know, and it creates this very tangible, mesmerizing, you know, kind of hypnotic place that feels like, you know, a weird sort of dream that you've half forgotten. You know, so Kubrick was, you know, certainly my first favorite filmmaker, and one who, you know, I returned to again and again. There's basically, you know, two ways that you can rate a movie, you know, style and substance, and he's one of the few who kind of brings it, you know, with both.
Absolutely. Rodney, your film Room 237, talk to our listeners about I mean, how this started. I mean, what came about you? Where did you get the idea of doing this? Really, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's insane, right?
Not to me.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with insanity, though, Rodney. I don't even say that in any kind of condescending or negative way. I mean, it's really out there, dude.
Yeah, well, I know where you're coming from, but you know, for me, you know, my buddy Tim Kirk, you know, posted an essay, you know, one that had a theory about the moon landing, you know, on my Facebook page out of the blue. And, you know, I got to say, my first reaction was, well, of course there's more going on in The Shining than I ever expected. This might be it. You know, I was so ready to believe that there was more in that film than meets the eye. And Tim and I started looking back at things we had uncovered earlier. You know, I had a great book, Thomas Allen Nelson's Stanley Kubrick, Inside a Filmmaker's Maze. And in that one, there's about a half a page footnote breaking down the numerology of number 237. You know, and Bill Blakemore had written about some of the Native American themes that went back. You know, he wrote an essay that was serialized in, you know, newspapers in the 80s. So there had been an idea that The Shining, you know, was working in kind of a weird way. And all of a sudden it seemed to be a really interesting, exciting challenge to try to break down, well, what are the symbolic ways that people look at The Shining? You know, and maybe we could do some sort of comprehensive overview. But, you know, as the two of us, you know, continued doing our research into what people had put out there, it became clear that not only weren't we going to be able to get, you know, every major theory about The Shining down, but we wouldn't be able to get like every major scene from The Shining discussed. You know, if you were going to really do it, you know, you would inch through the movie scene by scene and let, you know, 10 or 12 people take a stab at it. So, you know, a proper, you know, full symbolic analysis of the movie is going to be, you know, 10 or 12 hours long. So, you know, I hoped in different ways to indicate that what we were doing was sort of the tip of the iceberg. And and kind of early on, you know, Tim and I would have, you know, sort of these long conversations about, you know, what is 237 really about? And, sometimes we would get away from The Shining and just talk about the ways that, people, try to understand, art or their own lives, the world around them, or, even something like the Madonna scene in Reservoir Dogs, and compare that to, the project that we were embarking on.
How could you get from there to there, Rodney? You're talking about what the diner scene at the beginning of Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, that one we got 3 or 4 people, talking about what they think Madonna really meant. When she wrote Like a Virgin, and Tarantino's version, is the one that kind of steals the show. And it's funny because in that version, everybody, in that movie, everybody, seems to enjoy that conversation. But, I don't know that people after the fact, were arguing with Tarantino about whether or not his interpretation was right. But, there are folks, who give 237 static sometimes, debating, whether this guy's right or that guy or all or none of them.
We're talking with Rodney Ascher, director of Room 237. We're talking Stanley Kubrick tonight. Max is a fan of Room 237, and he's got a couple questions for you.
Cool. Hey, Max.
Hey, Rodney. I have to tell you, first question is this. I'm married, and is it true that chicks don't really get into Kubrick? Because when I told my wife about this doc, she was really wet for it.
Well, I don't have statistics, but yeah, that is the reputation, and there've been reviews of 237, where they talk about the kind of fan, that The Shining or Kubrick attracts, and people have said, often, more often than not, men, the same thing with, maybe David Fincher, but I was happy that we did find, at least one woman to chime in with her 2 cents about the movie. And what was great, for me, there was a moment where Julie Kearns, mentions the fact that Jack Nicholson doesn't do any work around that hotel. The only time you ever see anybody doing any
right, it's Shelley Duvall.
It's Shelley Duvall messing around with the boilers.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's kind of a woman's insight. Like, not only is he a fucking maniac, but
That's all right.
He doesn't he doesn't pull his weight. He just sleeps late and chips away at that incomprehensible book he's working on. He doesn't even do the one thing that he's contracted for in the hotel, and he
has no interest. He has no interest in that. He doesn't do a bit of work. I mean, the hardest thing he does is throw that tennis ball.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, in the book and in the miniseries, you see him doing a little bit more.
I'm glad you brought up the miniseries, Rodney, because do you have any insight as to what the hell Stephen King's problem was with Stanley's version of The Shining?
Well, I can only speculate, but my guess is that, look, if you watch the miniseries and if you watch it with a commentary track on, as I recommend you do, Stephen King talks about how autobiographical the story was. That he was inspired, to write it after staying in the Stanley Hotel on its closing night, in Colorado, and had an experience mildly like what happens in The Shining. And he was, frankly, he was battling alcoholism at the time. So it may be if my best guess is that, Stephen King wasn't just, disappointed that his story got changed, but it was kind of his life story. It was very autobiographical and personal to him.
Wow.
Hey, Rodney, are you an alcoholic at all?
No.
You don't drink? Are you married?
I'm married. I drink a little, but I feel pretty safe in saying I'm not an alcoholic.
Rodney, why do you give a shit so much about The Shining and its themes and the people who interpret it that way? Why does it mean so much to you?
Well, I mean, I am an obsessive, personality. In some way, and I was thrilled to spend 2 years reading everything that folks have had to say about The Shining. And I was we had a 1-year-old at the time. He's now 3. So a lot of the work, a lot of the research was happening between the hours of 9 p.m. and 3 in the morning, at which some of this stuff is very, very, very persuasive, but also incredibly creepy and, addictive. And I don't know, I fall into rabbit hole after rabbit hole along those lines. I was lucky enough in this case to be able to, make this obsessive behavior, halfway adaptive.
But why is it that your documentary looks like it has been made after you have made many, many documentaries? How many documentaries have you made leading up to this? Because you have animation, you have incredible characters, you have a riveting story. I mean, how the hell did you wind up doing this thing?
Well, thanks. It's my first feature, though I've been, making my own, bizarre short films and videos, for, over 15 years. I did a short documentary, about 10 minutes long, a year or two before 237, and I had pretty good luck with that one. And it's stylistically, it's kind of similar, and its focus was on people who, as kids, had a phobia of the Screen Gems logo. And I presented.
Whoa!
Wait a second. What?
Well, the Screen Gems logo that would come on, and this in particular, this is like the late '60s, early '70s Screen Gems logo, where there's sort of like these two curved, kind of J shapes that animate over a yellow background with a little dot in the middle.
Okay.
Well, there's a world of people who are obsessed and kind of horrified, not only of that logo, but of the PBS logo, of the Viacom V of Doom, the Paramount Closet Killer. There was a notorious one on Disney VHS tapes for a while called Neon Mickey. And that was a world, again, that, for some reason, really resonated with me, and that, for a year or two, I was doing nothing but, reading the confessions of, logophobics. And
wow.
When it came time to, finally make that project, I tried to make it a horror movie, itself, just assume, like, take it as a given, that this was a reasonable thing to make a film about, and, try to make the audience develop, some weird spontaneous phobia of the logo by playing it again and again and again and forwards and backwards and in slow motion with, a horrifying music on top of it.
Are you a horror fanatic, Rodney? Yeah.
I'm a recovering horror fanatic. In that,
for you.
Once you had a kid, you stopped.
Well, it just kind of tapered. Well, I mean, probably after getting married, I don't go out as much, and playing them in the house, with someone who hates them.
She's not a fan.
Only she's kind of like a great litmus test. Like The Shining, she loves, and we saw it. Actually, there's a great restaurant in San Francisco where they projected movies in the courtyard, and we watched it on a Halloween night together. And she's like, "This is an awesome movie."
But she wouldn't sit through the Human Centipede.
No, or Human Centipede Part 2, or my personal favorite, Friday the 13th, which is Part 6.
Oh. You love that. You like Jason, huh?
Well, it's kind of a love-hate thing. What's interesting, is like a game of telephone to see the way, that story changes, from movie to movie, and yes. in continuity they don't make any kind of sense, and it's as if the writer and director of each one was only sort of told the story of the last one, by a friend after school. Right. which for me is kind of the charm of them.
So, Rodney, these remarkable people you interview in this film, did you go to their homes? Were there odors? What's going on with these folks?
Well, actually, these people are really together.
Yeah.
Bill Blakemore, who talks about the Native American themes. He's like a globe-trotting, reporter for ABC News. Jeffrey
wow.
And Julie Kearns is a playwright and an artist, and John Thorryan is,
So these are people you loved. Musician. You loved your subjects.
Yeah, these are my people. I'm more like them than I am like anyone in my family.
Why? What's
your family understand? Yeah. What's going on?
What's going on with your family? Well,
I don't have any problem with them, but they're not the kind of folks who would want to stay up to 3 a.m. talking about the way the carpet patterns change in The Shining.
Your mom is not into that?
Well, she's into 237 mostly because it got a couple of good write-ups that she could show her friends, but if it was if anybody else had made it, I can't imagine that she would have seen it.
Now, Rodney, what do you think of The Shining? Do you think it's a straight horror narrative, or do you think there's something else going on? Use your third eye, which I know you're using all the time.
Well, I mean, I do think it's a really compressed, document, full of links and sort of oblique references, to other material. I mean, there's like throwaway line when he's talking to Lloyd the bartender, white man's burden, which, if you're into sort of the history of colonialism, like Bill Blakemore is a reference to the, Rudyard Kipling poem. And, what you know about that adds to your reading of the movie. Also, if you want to talk about themes of colonialism, take a look, at almost every film in his filmography, and they almost always sort of talk about the struggle between, like regular people and sort of a corrupt ruling class. I mean, that goes back at least to Paths of Glory, and continues on, through Eyes Wide Shut. One of the interesting things is, in 237 is supposed to be about The Shining, but we wind up looking at most every one of his other films too. Is they do all seem to be kind of linked together, and getting at some of the same ideas and same themes from different angles. So what's wonderful is in talking about The Shining, you can't help but also talk about Kubrick's other films, history, literature, and then what's been kind of exciting to me is the personal stories of people who see it. I mean, unlike fans, for me, talking to people who are into Star Wars or something, they get into those worlds, but I don't hear as much personal stuff about how the movie reflects on you. I know, like now that I have a son, a weird thing about The Shining is, I first saw it when I was a little kid and I snuck into the movie theater, and clearly I was watching that through Danny's eyes. And, now that I'm a dad, I see it, through Jack's eyes as a cautionary tale about, don't be the worst father in the world. So it's a movie, that also kind of changes as you change. There's some, really weird black voodoo baked into its DNA.
I think I think all of Stanley's movies change as you progress as a human. As you get older and you change, as you change personally, you could watch these movies every 3 to 5 years, and they come at you completely differently each time.
Right, for sure.
Does your wife get really turned on by your brain?
I wish.
Like, let me ask you this: does she wear a lovely, vibrant sundress and gently squat upon your head, and your brain vibrates through her panties and turns her on in the best possible way?
Yeah, I'll say yes, because that's more interesting than the truth.
Hey, we're talking with Rodney Ascher. He's the director of Room 237. And Rodney, we're going to cut you loose in a couple minutes, but I want to give Dave an opportunity to ask you a question or two. Dave?
What's interesting about this is, first of all, I get the staying up till 3 a.m. obsessed reading something that somebody's posted on the internet, whether it be about The Shining being about moon landings, or whether it be about the crazy Denver airport, or just these bizarre human mysteries that are put before us. And how big a role does the internet sort of play in bringing all these people together, especially like talking about the logophobia? I mean, would all these people know that there are other people feeling this way? And then how many people are just kind of like freeloading on the concept, do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't know about the freeloaders, but absolutely, digital culture is what made this movie possible. Both, people watch movies differently now that, you can, if you wanted to see The Shining, well, actually it was one of the first movies to be popular on VHS, which I think is also maybe a good reason to suspect that he'd make a movie dense with references, knowing that people are going to be able to see it again and again on home video. But without the internet, people wouldn't be able to read each other's ideas, to share what they found with new folks. Because there didn't used to be a platform for everybody to have their opinion. And the logophobic thing is interesting because I first discovered one guy who had written an essay about it, maybe 10, 12 years ago. And, it was a very simple sort of GeoCities kind of page. And, I had a flashback when I read that till, when I was about 3 years old, watching 19 hours of TV in a row, and not having a vocabulary to describe, the feeling that I would get when I would see those weird little proto-computer animations and think that, I was seeing sort of the cracks between the TV shows and getting a look at, sort of the Matrix source code behind I Dream of Jeannie. But then for some reason I remembered it again a few years back. And when I checked in again, in that time, a whole community had sprung up and all these other people had found each other. Because, when I found that first guy, I was blown away because I thought I was the only one, that had gotten kind of freaked out by these things. But, now a ton of people are able to reach each other. And it's sort of revolutionary in a lot of ways.
It's fascinating to me how these communities like literally spring up around something like that, and how people become really bonded, like very intimately, and these are very intimate peer groups that are forming because of this stuff. It's incredible.
It is. Sometimes it gets dangerous. Where those anorexia pages where people encourage each other to keep losing more weight, and nobody else understands them. But for the most part, I mean, it's the most basic human thing to want to find someone, who understands where you're coming from.
It's just the obscurity of it is amazing. That's what consistently amazes me, is finding things like that are just, you're like, no, there's no way somebody else is thinking that, or there's no way somebody else feels that way. And then discovering that not only does another person, but there's hundreds of them.
Yeah, I mean, I know I saw a commercial for a remote control helicopter, and I thought that, hey, maybe I should buy one and then fly it by the staircase and let the cat jump on top of it. And wouldn't that be an amazing YouTube video? But then I stopped and thought about it and went on YouTube, and already 5 people had already done it. So it wasn't. So we've hit this point where YouTube doesn't only have every video that you remember, every great scene from Lost in Space, or alien action figure, dripping goop TV commercial that you vaguely remember, but things that you can imagine are already up there too.
So, Rodney, I have to say, I find your brain fascinating, and I'm hearing really lovely sounds of family in the background. How does all this prevent you from being a misanthrope?
I don't know, man. I just do my best. We all do our best.
Are you into people? It seems like you kind of are. You're into adventure. You have a very broad mind. You're a filmmaker. I mean, life is good, right?
Yeah, mostly. I'll take all that stuff.
What is your secret?
What's my what?
Your secret, Rodney. You got to give Max some kind of darkness. You have to. There's got to be some. There has to be a miss somewhere, Rodney.
Well, I'll make that your mission to discover. see what you can dig up.
What is next for you? What is next?
I'm doing one of the. I just finished editing 80 hours of never heard before recordings by Andy Kaufman that he did in the 70s. And me and producer Vernon Chapman, the guy who does Wonder Chosen and works on Louie and South Park, the two of us cut it into a comedy album that came out about 2 weeks ago called Andy and His Grandmother. And I really put the word comedy in quotes because most of it is very troubling. Right. And I'm going to be doing one of the chapters in the next ABCs of Death.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we had a guest.
Outstanding.
Yeah, that is cool. We had John Schnepp on.
Oh, yeah, he's amazing, right?
Yeah, a few months back. Yeah,
that was a very bewildering film.
Yeah.
I was exhausted by the end of it.
Yeah.
You know who else has a chapter in the ABCs of Death, guys? Stephen Kostansky, director of Manborg.
Manborg, yeah, that's right. Very cool.
Just,
Rodney,
just saying.
Yeah, that's awesome to be a part of that. I mean, it's what 26 filmmakers. I mean, that's
yeah.
I mean, you must be really excited. Anything else though that you're going to be doing on your own? I mean, do you have any projects besides the Kaufman? Do you have another feature length coming out, or any ideas to do one?
Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 things that I'm working on at once, but nothing I'm really ready to announce yet.
Okay, fair enough.
Hopefully, I might have been better off just doing one and concentrating on it, but here I am anyway.
Rodney,
this is not really a question, Rodney. This is just more of an I don't know what the hell it is, but there's this author, William Gibson. He wrote a novel where there's a character in it who is allergic to brands, like allergic.
Case Pollard.
Yeah.
Pattern recognition.
Pattern recognition. To what extent is this like logophobia like that? Like, could it be used in the way it's used in the book? Because in the book, just for the listeners who haven't read the book, she uses this allergy to logos and brands to find good ones. If it bothers her, it's going to be a success. Is the prevailing wisdom.
Yeah, no, I wasn't aware of the book when I made the film, but someone pointed out the similarity, and I read it afterwards. And certainly there's a connection there. I don't know.
I'm fascinated by this. I'm really fascinated. It's so interesting.
Yeah, well, check out the closing logos. Check out the closing. Well, you can look at the film at the sfromhell.com, and then there's links under a column called Logophobia, and one of the good ones. There's something called the Closing Logos Group, where it's sort of a Wikipedia where different people put information about all the different logos, that have gone up, and they rate them, by scare factor.
Get out.
Yeah, there was a guy who I chatted with once, who was really into or really afraid of the PBS logo, the one where like the P is that silhouette like a nose.
Yes.
Yeah, and he said, he said, and he had Asperger's, and said that. That logo in particular drives people with Asperger's just up the wall.
Oh, man. Rodney, one last question. Did you recently watch on the Learning Channel The Man with the 132-pound scrotum?
Come on.
I saw a thumbnail for it. It looked pretty funny.
I saw a thumbnail. You are way too ascended, Rodney.
Rodney, listen. Thank you so much for coming on the Cutting Room Movie Podcast. It was a real joy to talk to you. Your love for Kubrick is outstanding. Your love for film is awesome. We really loved having you on. Let our listeners know about your website, your Twitter feed, so they could follow you and check your stuff out.
Cool. Yeah, we'll go to rodneyascher.com, and there's a link to the Twitter thing right on there.
Awesome, and we'll definitely put a link up to your website on our website. With the show. Rodney, thanks a lot for coming on, my brother. And hopefully when you have some, after ABC's of Death comes out, maybe you come back on and talk to us again.
Well, that'd be great. Thanks, guys. Good to talk to you.
Thank you, Rodney.
Later.
Bye, Rodney.
All right.
Bye, Rodney.
Rodney Ascher, director of Room 237. Max, an interesting cat, man.
I'm not Rodney Ascher, but it's the first time I've ever heard anyone discuss the Screen Gems logo with the same level of horror and revulsion that I have felt since I was a kid. And I swear to God, I've never heard anyone say that before. And that is totally legitimate. The Viacom logo and the Screen Gems logo, I don't have a fear or a phobia. I just have, when I see them, I get a deep visceral anxiety.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're logophobic.
Wow.
Well, I'm in general, advertising does not, it gives me a sense of anxiety, but on top of which there's particular things, there's certain geometrical patterns that get me stuck. And the Screen Gems feels like two hooks, like going into each other in a really anxious way. And the same with the Viacom. The Viacom was just like, bleh, made me want to puke. Yeah, so there's some trigger in there. There's some visual pattern trigger in certain like neurological conditions that is like,
you're gonna kill the president.
Yeah, exactly. That's the what is it in the Manchurian Candidate? The ace of whatever. I don't remember what card it was that set off the Manchurian Candidate.
I just feel,
Queen of Hearts.
Rodney Ascher is going to have Dave Pace now on this logophobia for like a year.
Well, the crazy thing is when I read that book, Dave, I read the same one.
It's a great book.
The first one I read was Pattern Recognition.
Yeah.
That was actually a sequel to an earlier one, but when I read that, and the Michelin Tire Man wanted to make her puke, and I was like, that's the funniest thing ever, because that's like, yeah, I mean, if you have anxiety about something, and then like he was obviously just kind of cracking a joke, but the Michelin Tire Man making her want to puke was great.
Yeah, the book's amazing. I mean, Gibson's a fucking
Gibson's
insanely
fantastic.
gifted author.